They called it training, but to the men of the 77th Infantry Division, it felt more like punishment. In 1943, thousands of middle-aged draftees, nicknamed the Old Bastards, were marched into the desert of Arizona and turned into human guinea pigs. The Army wanted answers. Could older men endure the extremes of combat, as well as the teenagers who normally filled the ranks? How far could a man march in 100-degree heat on a single canteen of water? How long could a platoon survive in the wilderness when led by the lowest-ranking officer with almost no supplies? The 77th was about to find out, whether they wanted to or not. The story begins at Camp Hyder, 100 miles outside of Phoenix. When the 77th arrived, there wasn't much waiting for them. A few tents, open sand, and orders to make it livable. The men dug their own wells for water, built mud huts to replace the tents they didn't have, and learned quickly that survival here would come down to ingenuity. This wasn't just training, it was an experiment. The first test was simple, if brutal. Each soldier was issued just 1 quart of water and ordered to march into the desert heat. They would keep going until men began to collapse. The Army was collecting data. How far can the average soldier travel before exhaustion, dehydration, and heat stroke take hold? To the men, it was cruel and dangerous. But to Army planners preparing for a global war, it was science. It didn't stop there. The next phase stretched the limits even further. Platoons were led into the desert for 6-day exercises. Their guide? A second lieutenant, the lowest-ranking officer, often the least experienced. At the end of each day, food and water would be dropped at a predetermined location. If the lieutenant could navigate there correctly, the men ate and drank. If not, they went without. Some platoons went days without proper resupply. In at least a few cases, men died of exposure and dehydration before the experiment ended. To call it training hardly does justice to what these soldiers endured. It was a calculated hardship, a deliberate pushing of human limits in some of the most unforgiving terrain in the continental United States. But something remarkable happened. The men adapted. They learned to move in the early hours and late evenings, conserving strength during the hottest part of the day. They rationed water with discipline born of necessity. And though some paid the ultimate price, the division as a whole survived 6 months of these trials. The experience left scars, both physical and emotional. Many of the men never forgot the cruelty of being treated like test subjects, but they responded in the only way soldiers know how, with dark humor. At the end of their time at Hyder, they created an unofficial medal, the Hyder Campaign Ribbon. The ribbon itself was made of sandpaper. The medal was a broken thermometer. It wasn't authorized, of course, but many wore it proudly on their uniforms in private. It was their way of saying, we endured what should have broken us. And in truth, the experiments had a purpose. The Army now had hard data on how soldiers performed in extreme heat, on minimal rations, and under poor leadership. It was information that could save lives in theaters like North Africa or the Pacific Islands. But for the men of the 77th, the takeaway was simpler. If they could survive Camp Hyder, they could survive anything. That resilience would soon be tested in real combat. Within a year, the Old Bastards would land on Guam, fight through Leyte, and climb the ridges of Okinawa. In every battle, they carried with them the toughness forged in the Arizona desert. Today, the Hyder Campaign is little more than a footnote in history, but for the 77th, it was their crucible, a trial by heat and deprivation that shaped them into one of the most feared divisions of the Pacific War. So the next time you hear about Guam, Leyte, or Hacksaw Ridge, remember that before the Old Bastards faced the Japanese, they first faced the desert, and somehow they came out stronger.